Members, the committee will call, or committee, the chair will call the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform to order. There is a quorum. We have two sets of minutes I'd like to get out of the way for adoption, the March 11th and March 12th, and I would entertain a motion to that effect.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the minutes from the 11th and the 12th.
Thank you. Representative Poston moves adoption of the minutes from March 11th and March 12th. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion prevails. Our minutes from the March 11th and March 12th are adopted. Members, we have a slightly long agenda in front of us. My hope is to move quickly and expeditiously as possible. We have 4 bills I'd like us to get through before our normally adjourned time, and then we'll reconvene later this evening after our caucuses meet to finish off that agenda. And so I certainly would appreciate everyone's participation in having a good, strong conversation, but moving as quickly as possible through these bills. So with that, we have House File 530, Representative Johnson. And Representative Johnson, I believe your motion is to lay over House File 530 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill.
Chair Mariani, that is my motion.
Very well. Representative Johnson moves House File 530 be laid over for possible inclusion. And so, Representative Johnson, your bill is formally before the committee.
Chair Mariani, members, House File 530 is a domestic abuse prevention grant program specifically designed for veterans. It's $398,000 in 2020 and $398,000 in 2021. What is the project? It's a domestic abuse project that does their best to build communities free from violence and provide healing to members and their families. Change Step is a group therapy program for men and women who have served or are currently serving in our military who have used abusive behaviors in their relationships. Our military is good at tearing down and then building them back up to be good soldiers, but unfortunately, once they come back, they don't build them down and make them good citizens again, or productive, and untrain them in the way they were designed to survive. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to my first testifier, Annie Van Avery, who will do a short description and then introduce the rest of her team.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Van Avery. Please give us your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Yes, Annie Van Avery, and I'm the Executive Director of the Domestic Abuse Project. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's a privilege to be in front of the committee to talk about our organization and our unique therapeutic program for service members, Change Step. Before my colleagues speak to the specifics of the bill, I wanted to offer a very brief overview of how DAP is unique and has been throughout our 40 years of commitment to build communities free from violence by providing holistic healing for every member of the family. DAP has served as a local and national model for addressing the generational cycle of violence through not only treating victim survivors of domestic violence, but starting one of the first programs that simultaneously worked with perpetrators. This was and continues to be pretty groundbreaking. With the belief that in most cases, abusive behaviors are learned behaviors, DAP has innovated models to support accountability and processes to help future generations to not repeat the violence that they have experienced in their families. This work not only includes therapeutic programs for our clients, but it also intersects with public safety, the Department of Justice, family courts, child welfare, law enforcement, community development, intertribal agencies, and more. Our bill supports veterans and service members in their journeys of learning, accountability, healing, and change, while it also represents larger multi-generational change. If funded, this bill will be stewarded by an organization with an exemplary 4-decade track record of excellence in addressing issues of domestic violence with the goal to continue to center support for veterans and service members. If there are no questions at this time, Mr. Chair and committee members, I'd like to introduce Amithany Keefe, our Director of Client Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Avery. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Keefe.
Thank you. So my name is Amithany Keefe, and I'm the Director of Client Services at DAP. I've also co-facilitated the Change Step group, so I'm happy to be here today to share a little bit more about the services that we offer veterans. The first Change Step group was underway in 2012, and it was built off of DAP's men's program curriculum to incorporate military culture, teachings, and experiences. The cornerstone of our Change Step program is group therapy sessions that are meant to provide education around domestic violence-related topics, as well as facilitate depthful group discussion about ways in which service members engage in unhealthy relationship dynamics. Our group consists of veterans, many of whom have seen combat or have experienced other traumas that have led to post-traumatic stress disorder. Change Step is unique in that we attend to the trauma veterans have experienced as a result of their military service. While not an excuse for abuse, we understand that this trauma impacts and potentially increases the lethality of violence. While some skills that are taught in the military are vital for the survival of the individual and the unit, when returning home, they may impede a service member's capacity to thrive as a civilian. A pillar of our understanding is that domestic violence is taught through our lived experiences, and a different way of engaging in conflict can also be taught. While some skills, or another way that we incorporate military culture that is incorporating more of a positive aspect, is looking at working with the unit as a whole. And so in our programs, one of the things that we really talk about is when you're meeting with a group of folks, that you think of them as your unit through your healing journey. And that helps really foster more vulnerability, more trust, and more cohesiveness within the program. The military also has a principle of upholding a certain standard of behavior and of not giving others a pass. This level of accountability is part of what makes the group therapy program effective, as service members are able to hold themselves accountable and hold each other accountable, instead of it being the therapist's responsibility alone. In addition to facilitating groups, the Change Step program staff are involved in training nationally and engaged in coordinated community response to domestic violence work with other systems serving veterans. In addition to local trainings, one of our most notable training partnerships is with the Air Force program. We have trained, and the Air Force has institutionalized our Change Step program, and it's being used at 75 Air Force bases worldwide. Since the Change Step program began, 94 men have graduated from our program in Minnesota and approximately 450 across the Air Force groups. At the close of group, service members have an increased capacity to express empathy for their partners, to recognize and identify cues to violence and de-escalate, to recognize and stop destructive self-talk, to accept responsibility for violence, and display a shift in attitudes that contribute to interpersonal violence. Our request today is that you offer your support in obtaining funding for this service, as well as supportive services for veterans' families and resources for building a robust research and evaluation program. While our organization works with every member of the family, our philosophy is that domestic violence will not stop unless individuals that use abusive behaviors are held accountable and provided with the opportunity to heal from their own traumas and unlearn the teachings that have led to their use of violence in the home. By doing so, we have the opportunity to truly end the intergenerational transmission of trauma in our community. So with that, I'll introduce Jody Shipp, who is our case management supervisor.
Thank you, Ms. Keefe, and welcome to the committee, Ms. Shipp.
Good afternoon. I'm Jody Shipp. I supervise the case management program at the Domestic Abuse Project. I've also served in the National Guard for over 15 years, multiple deployments. I'm here today to introduce Darren McKinley. He is a participant who graduated from our Change Step program, and he will be sharing with us his experience.
Very well. Welcome to the committee, Mr. McKinley.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Darren McKinley, and I would like to share my story and my experiences at the Domestic Abuse Project. In the Men's Change Step program, I'm a little nervous here. The men's program is for men who have used abusive behavior in their intimate partner relationships and are looking for a way to make a change. And the Change Step program is specifically for men who have served in the military. I think in the beginning, I thought that this was going to be a waste of my time because I felt like I didn't do anything wrong. I felt like my situation didn't require me to be at the Domestic Abuse Project. After my first assignment called the Self-Control Plan, I saw some things that I did that were identified as abusive behavior, but I was still in denial. Things started to change for me after another man in the group presented his story of abuse in graphic detail during the Taking Responsibility assignment. He vividly described an incident of abuse in his relationship and owned the harm that he had done. His descriptions were difficult to hear. His honesty drew me in, and I immediately felt committed to this process. I started to become more engaged because I noticed that it took a lot of courage to tell a story, a level of courage that I was lacking. I then proceeded to put everything I had into telling my story as he did. That's when I was able to really take something out of the experience. I tried to continue the tone set by this veteran because he helped me address my story honestly. I realized that a high standard was being set for us, and I wanted to meet that standard, and I wanted to be honest as well. Sometimes when guys start the men's program, they are skeptical. We don't necessarily want to be there. We are being ordered by probation, most likely. But the groups are special because we form a camaraderie that allows us to give honest feedback to each other and hold each other accountable. We all did something that was harmful to people that we loved in the community, and there's no denying that. But we also need a place where we can speak freely about our abusive behaviors and process them in a way that we can really overcome them. We need to take responsibility for ourselves and heal from the shame and the guilt we feel now that we understand the harm and the pain that we have caused. DAP provides that space to accomplish all of this and more. Domestic Abuse Project became a place where I really could learn to take responsibility and break the cycle of violence in my life. I eventually liked coming to DAP. I would get up early, bring a bite to eat, work on my assignments. I look forward to discussions every week because I could talk about what was working, and what I still needed help with. I knew that if I really wanted to get back with my kids and have a healthy co-parenting relationship with their mom, I had to change. After many weeks in this Change Step program, I have learned to stop my threatening and violent behavior. I know how to identify these behaviors as abusive. The group sessions about self-control, nonviolence, and communication have been great because now I have learned how to implement these good practices and I can use them with my future partner. Today, I'm working on building back my relationship with my kid's mom. I use the self-control plan I created in my everyday life, like when I'm at work dealing with a coworker or managing my stress. I use a self-control plan when I'm interacting with my kid's mom. I recognize her trigger words and stay away from negative thinking. I take time out when I feel myself getting frustrated or heated, and I constantly work on remaining positive because I want to avoid the risk of falling into old habits. This is the part of why I'm here today speaking to you. As a part of ending the program, we discuss ways we will work toward ending domestic violence in the community or making up for some of the harm we have caused. I share that I want to be a domestic abuse project advocate and tell my friends and family about the cycle of violence and how to change it. I want to speak to younger men who I come across who have never been told about domestic abuse. I want to speak to each of you about the cycle of violence and how we can work against it. I want to be the example and the standard to show how changing abusive behavior can be done and that we can be healthy partners, parents, and members of the community. I want to be present in my kids' lives and be a positive influence. And I know that means I have to continue taking responsibility for my actions and practice self-control in all parts of my life. I don't want my kids to grow up witnessing violence or thinking that abuse in a relationship is normal or okay. I want to be the man who my kids' mother thought I was for my girls, and I want to teach my kids how they should be treated. I've taken responsibility, and the cycle of violence has stopped with me. And just to elaborate on the rest of this, my kids will be coming up here to visit me this summer. She is going to let me take my kids for 2 weeks, and this will be the first time that this has happened since all this has taken place. So the program does work, and it has worked for me, and that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Mr. McKinley. Congratulations to you on that victory, and I want you to know that this committee sees you and hears you and acknowledges the courage that it took for you to confront yourself and to do that, obviously in vulnerable space with others. We recognize that that vulnerable path is actually a path to power and strength that allows you to serve yourself better, serve your children, your family better, and to serve our society better. So thank you for making that commitment and having the courage to do that and having the courage to be with us here today. Representative Johnson, do you have other?
Representative Lesh had a question.
Okay, so why don't we do that, and then we'll start doing questions of the testifiers, and then perhaps we'll see if others want to testify on this bill. So Chairman Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the testifier, thank you for your testimony. One of the most difficult things, I think, in dealing with, say, domestic situations, I prosecuted domestics for 15 years. In the last 3 years, I've defended a few. And in the criminal justice system, it's really difficult to wrap your arms around what's going on in here, because from the perspective of two people who are involved in domestic, there's all this history that went on for days or months or even years. And that's the lens through which they see it. That's the lens through which they see the incident. But the law sees it through the lens of something that happened, a discrete incident that happened at that time. And that's what you're responsible for, and that's what you're accountable for. And I've seen people, the folks that I prosecuted through the years, have just a heck of a time trying to reconcile the two of those. Because you're saying, do you not know, like, all this other stuff? Like, we don't care. That's not relevant to what happened on that incident. And that causes, I think, has caused major problems to reach some semblance of what the parties see as justice. So what you just said, and going through this process, reaching a level of zen, like that's all I can describe it, you're forced to go through that and face your own demons or face your own situations. Most people are not. So when you go through that and have completed successfully, you're better than all these people who've never had to confront those aspects of themselves. So I congratulate you for that. I think your testimony was compelling. It's important, and thanks for being here. And thanks for all you who participated in making this opportunity available as well. Thanks.
Indeed. Thank you, Chairman Lesh. Representative Edelson.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Representative Johnson for bringing this bill. It's such an important one. I grew up in a home where my mom was on the receiving end of domestic abuse for well over 5 years when I was a young woman, and I grew up thinking that relationships looked like that. So to the testifier, Mr. McKinley, I just want to say thank you, and listening to you, I hope you realize how brave you are, how strong you are. I know that your daughters will, when they come visit you this summer, will be so proud of the man that you are.
Thank you, Representative Edelson. Representative Poston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, Representative Johnson. Is this Change Step program just in Hennepin County, or is it a statewide program?
Representative Johnson.
The program is, right now, they've been participated in, I believe, 15 different counties. Not just Hennepin, Ramsey, but Carlton, Mille Lacs, Isani, or Chisago, Washington, and they're trying to build more and more. It's where the military people come from. One of the facts that why I support this bill, I don't get on a lot of bills for grants, especially in the public safety area. But the ones I do get on are the ones that work. On that fact sheet that you received in your packet, it shows 96% of the veterans who complete the program within 1 year never reoffend. They do not reoffend. 50% come in on their own without the courts demanding it. They recognize they have a problem. They participate before they're into the court system. And 83% are never violent again. this is a program that works. This is that one that we should really sponsor and do this. And as far as I'm concerned, it should be set up in every county in the state.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can add, anyone that can get to us, we will serve, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Shipp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson, thank you for that information. I'm glad to hear that the program is growing, and I thank you for bringing this bill forward.
Ms. Shipp, I'm curious, the bill obviously is interested and focused on veterans and their families. Is this kind of work also available for the broader public beyond that population and effective as well?
Mr. Chairman, for clarification, did you ask if the program was available for people who serve outside the military?
Yes.
Yes, we do have a mainstream program for men who use abusive behavior, and we also have a victim survivor program as well, open door policy.
Very well. Thank you. Representative Gross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. McKinley. Good job. Very good point was made at the beginning. We train them up to send them out to be the best that they can be in the battlefield. When they come home, it's a whole different environment. It's a whole different environment that they have to be able to readjust to, and a lot of our soldiers have a very difficult time for that. If there's more programs like this on the front end when they're coming home, to where he can help them reintegrate into society. We do that for people coming out of prison, but are we doing that for our soldiers coming home from war? That is something that I think we need to address wholeheartedly to make sure that the people that we ask to go to war for our country come home and are able to get back into living the civilian life without these kind of hitches. Thank you again.
Thank you, Representative Grosso. You and I are about the same age, and so we're Vietnam era young folks. And I'm sure, like my family, you experienced family members. I had several cousins came back, and there was nothing for them in this regard. And I think there's a lot more we still have to do, even decades later. But hopefully, programs like this will allow us to grow those efforts.
Much younger than you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, at least 10 years younger than me. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on House File 530? If not, then Representative Johnson, let me just quickly say that, so the motion here, just so the testifiers understand, we're going to be laying this bill over, and the idea is to then have the bill be part of putting together a much bigger bill for us to move forward. There are other programs that are similar to this, and then there are a number of other public safety, criminal justice reform areas that we want to put together into a good, strong package. One of the things I want to work with you, Representative Johnson, is to make sure that as we do these appropriations, unless they're pilot programs, that we're doing them in a way so that they fit into a competitive grant process. I have no doubt that this program would do very well in such a grant process. And part of how we do that, of course, is the way you structured this bill, which is to identify, those key criteria that speak to the particular nature of this type of work that has proven to be effective. And so I look forward to working with you to make sure that we can get those resources where we need to get them, short of doing a direct earmark, and of course that's not in here now. But I'm also kind of signaling to other members how I intend to proceed going forward with our appropriations decisions as well. Members, we heard a powerful story of redemption here, quite frankly. It fits a strong theme of this committee. One of the things about this bill, and I think the other bills we're going to be hearing today, is that we're raising the voices of people like Mr. McKinley. We're raising the voices of victims, of survivors, of those who work honestly and sincerely to redeem themselves, all towards building strong community here. And so it's appropriate that as we work on criminal justice reform, that we focus on these preventive intervention programs as a part of that as well. So again, thank you, Representative Johnson. I leave it to you for any last words.
Chair, members, this is a program that works. It has a very good proven track record. and it can help the veterans. And as it says, 50% come in on their own before they get into trouble. It's a way to get them so they do not get into the judicial system. So that, please support it.
Very well, thank you, Ms. Van Avery, Ms. Keefe, Ms. Shipp, and Mr. McKinley. And with that, the chair will lay over House File 530 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Thank you. Next, we have Representative Moller, House File 1014. And Representative Moller, you have the same motion before us, although you replace it with the numbers 1014.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Moller moves that House File 1014 be included, be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Your bill is before us formally.
Thank you so much.
Representative Moller.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members. So House File 1014 really came about because a recent Minnesota Supreme Court decision back in December indicated really that we have a loophole in our first-degree criminal sexual conduct statute. And when we were here talking earlier about the working group for sexual assault offenses, I had a colleague who talked a little bit about that case. I have another testifier who is going to talk about that case. But in effect, what will happen, what currently happens based on the Supreme Court decision is that one act of genital-to-genital contact with someone under the age of 13 is first-degree criminal sexual conduct, but multiple acts is not. So really, we're just closing the loophole. I will note that a fiscal note was prepared on this. It came back as 0 because the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission assumes that the bill would reestablish the meaning of the existing statute that was understood before the date of that Supreme Court decision and wouldn't amount to an increase in number of beds. So what we're asking to do here is what prosecutors have been interpreting the law before the decision anyway. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to my testifier.
Very well. Thank you, Representative Moller. Welcome to the committee, sir. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is James Hanneman. I'm an assistant Hennepin County attorney, and currently I'm a prosecutor on our office's sexual assault initiative. And that initiative is our multifaceted effort to try and improve the investigation, the prosecution of sexual assaults, as well as improving victim services. I want to thank the committee for giving this bill a hearing and many other sexual assault bills this session. I think, as Representative Moller indicated, there's a lot of work to do on our sexual assault statutes. And so this particular bill addresses a loophole that we actually didn't think that we had in the sexual assault statutes until that Minnesota Supreme Court opinion, the Ortega-Rodriguez opinion in December. To explain why this bill is important and why taking away that tool from us as prosecutors in child sexual abuse cases is important, let's go back 25 years ago when prosecutors came to the legislature to ask that bare genital to bare genital contact be included as a first-degree criminal sexual conduct. We came to the legislature because of our experience prosecuting those cases told us that our statutes were asking child victims to tell us things that they were developmentally not capable of telling us. In particular, for children, and we're asking kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old to come in and testify in court and talk about sexual acts that they don't comprehend, they don't understand. In particular, they don't understand or can't express the concept of sexual penetration. And so we came forward to the legislature in 1994 and asked that bare genital to bare genital contact for children who are under the age of 13 be included in first degree. And ever since then, for about 25 years, we've been using that provision to successfully hold child sexual abusers accountable for their actions. In particular, the opinion that came out focused on that provision of multiple acts over an extended period of time. That provision is also very important to us, prosecuting child sexual abuse, because another thing that young children can't do very well is express concepts of time, of location, of number of times. And so typically what we have to ask child victims to do is tell us what usually happened when the perpetrator conducted the acts. And so, although I would note that the Supreme Court opinion seems to limit the use of bare genital to bare genital contact for a number of the provisions in first-degree criminal sexual conduct. So this bill here is a very simple fix to the language. The Supreme Court focused on really just how that statute was drafted and why the use of the term penetration in a number of the provisions took us away from that overarching definition at the beginning of the section. So we think that this bill will fix a number of those provisions and let us get back to prosecuting child sexual abuse cases the way we have for the last 25 years.
Very well. Are there any questions for Mr. Hanneman? Representative Johnson.
Chair Mariani, Representative Moller, this is issue is important. I've had to actually sit through the corner house interviews, watching them. I wish nobody would ever have to do them. I'm looking at this. It looks like the enactment date on this change would be October 1st. I'm just wondering if you want to possibly, if this is going to be included in the bill, or if it's moving on its own, change that to an enactment date upon final action, because it's a serious issue to get taken care of.
Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Johnson. I think that's a great idea. We're laying it over right now, but if there's a way we can amend that for inclusion in the omnibus, then I think we should do that. So thank you very much.
Very well. Are there any other questions? Representative Moller, do you have any other testifiers?
I don't, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to testify on House File 1014? If not, then Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I just really appreciate the opportunity to present this bill and hope that you will support it. Thank you.
Very good, Bill. Thank you, Representative Moller. With that, the chair lays over House File 1014 for possible inclusion in the committee's omnibus bill. Members, we now have House File 734. Representative Gomez, welcome back to the committee. Good point. And members, obviously there's a strong theme here that actually reflects how we started this committee in its first series of bills several weeks ago, focusing on gender-based violence. And so here as we close out, going into deadline committee, we're kind of closing out the way we opened. I think it should be a strong message of our voice standing together to be able to address a major challenge, a major wrong that continues in our society, that we are determined to write better and stronger laws for. And as I indicated earlier, doing that in a way where we're not just only pushing forward criminal justice reform, but doing so in a way where we're raising up the voices of survivors and victims and those seeking to redeem themselves. And so, Representative Gomez, it's in that spirit that I welcome you back to our committee. And I'm wondering, we do need a motion from a committee member here. Representative Howard, if you would be so kind to move, make sure I get the right number, House File 734 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill.
Mr. Chair, so moved.
Very well. House File 734 then is formally before us. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Chair Mariani and members of the committee. I'm pleased to bring House File 734 in front of you. It eliminates the statute of limitations for certain criminal sexual conduct offenses. You can read through sort of the details in the House Research Summary, and I want to, out of respect for your time, turn it over pretty quickly to our testifiers. Before I invite my first testifier up, though, I wanted to just introduce to you the women who are sitting next to me. We're not all going to testify, but it's just to say that this has really been an effort that's rooted in the community of survivors of this type of violence. And so I have Sarah Super right here, and Asma Mohammed from Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment. And they're both survivors and powerful advocates on this issue. And we're here because of their generosity in sharing their stories and sharing of themselves, and also their diligence and hard work in spending many years working on this issue. And because of that, we have bipartisan support for this effort, including a GOP chief author in the Senate. So I just want to say thank you. And we're going to invite up our first testifier. Ramsey County Attorney John Choi has joined us.
Welcome back to the committee, County Attorney Choi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here to support this bill, House File 734, and I want to thank Representative Gomez for bringing this forward. For the record, my name is John Choi. I am the Ramsey County Attorney, and I'm also here on behalf of the Minnesota County Attorneys Association, which also supports this bill. You know, as the county attorney and former city attorney, I've been engaged in this work for the past 12 years, and much of that work has been devoted to combating gender-based violence. And many times I've had to communicate the inability for us to prosecute a particular defendant because of the statute of limitations. And also I've learned a lot being engaged in this work and working really directly with victims and understanding more about kind of the trauma and how difficult it is oftentimes for victims to come forward. And I know that there's still a lot of improvements that need to be made to make our criminal justice system more responsive to the victims. But one of those big improvements could be this bill before you, which is to eliminate essentially the statute of limitations for criminal sexual conduct, with the exception of the fifth-degree CSE cases. And I wholeheartedly support this language because I think that it will provide the accountability and justice for our victims and our community. If you look at the legislative history of our statutes of limitations around criminal sexual conduct cases, what you will see is actually a societal evolution, an evolution of us, as we have come to better understand the victimization and the difficulties in victims coming forward and talking about and sharing their stories. It is something that is very, very difficult to do, and oftentimes it's because of the trauma, the hidden nature of the sexual abuse, and the social and the cultural barriers that exist that surround a victim as they think about reporting something that's happened to them. And I have come to know that really our cultural response in many ways is short, and also our system's response needs lots of improvements in this particular area. But by doing this, I believe that what it would do is that it would provide the opportunity and to recognize the fact that the truth is that many victims of sexual abuse don't talk about it, don't report it, because they have fears that they may not be believed. They have thinking about the things that they might lose in terms of social consequences and a whole host of other things, just to name those things too, that they have to deal with. And so what this will do is that it would allow for, to recognize that time that it might take for a victim that's necessary for them to unpack the trauma that's happened to them, and also allow for us to bring someone to justice. And now I come here today, I don't take lightly any type of changes with respect to statutes of limitations, because they're there for very good reason. But they're there to protect the defendant primarily. And I think we need to think about it in the context of victims. And in this particular case, I think based upon what we know about the trauma and how hard it is for victims to come forward. And we also know, just in the study that we did in April, that we just completed in April of 2018, that looked at our systems response, a quarter of the victims that actually do come forward to law enforcement, they actually drop out of the investigation at some point. And it's really not their fault. It's probably the fault of us and the system not serving those victims properly. And so there are lots of issues that I think this bill could actually achieve. And so I'm here today to stand with the advocates who have been working so hard, and Representative Gomez and many of you, to call for a change with respect to this law. So thank you very much.
Thank you, County Attorney Choi. Very eloquently put and very powerfully put as well. Representative O'Neill, you and I have had these conversations from the very beginning, and it really goes to the core of the profound cultural change that is needed in our society, which is moving, I believe. And in many ways, legal or statutory proposals like these are in some ways trying to catch up, where the hearts and minds and spirit of our society is moving as we open our eyes and become wiser and deeply inclusive of all sorts of communities that have not benefited from good balanced justice. Obviously, women in particular, other gender-based victims, as well as communities of color. So this is it's a powerful conversation, frankly, I believe the Minnesota legislature is having now. Thank you for helping to lead us in, as a practitioner in the field. County Attorney Choi.
Mr. Chairman, also, I failed to neglect that my colleague, Commissioner Jim McDonough, is here also in support of this legislation, and also Assistant Ramsey County Attorney Karin Long, who could answer some questions if you have any, if you want to delve into the details, who also was involved with our systems review that we published back in April of 2018.
Welcome to the Minnesota House County Commissioner and Assistant County Attorney. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Laura Stearns, want to come up?
Thank you. My name is Laura Stearns, and I really want to thank you all for the opportunity to tell my story today. The first time that I was sexually assaulted, I was 10 years old. And I was assaulted in my bedroom while I was playing with stuffed animals on my floor by a friend of my brother's. And this person silenced me by threatening me, and also while he was assaulting me by putting his hand over my mouth. It's just an example of how victims are silenced that I want to express. The second time that I was sexually assaulted, I was 15 by Jason McLean, who was an adult company actor at the Children's Theater Company. This time I was silenced by Mr. McLean, as well as the culture that I was embedded in at the Children's Theater, that made me believe that I was responsible and that his behavior was normal and to be expected. Being sexually assaulted is like no other crime because it affects us at the core of who we are as human beings. These crimes leave us shrouded in confusion and fear and shame, which silences us. Perpetrators of sexual crimes know this, and they use it to their advantage. I was in my 30s working through these assaults in therapy before I was able to completely understand and embrace the fact that I had not only had bad things happen to me, but that these were actually criminal actions that were taken, perpetrated against me. I was in my late 40s before I felt safe enough to talk to any people other than my therapist or my husband about what had happened to me. And that was after many years of processing these things in therapy. It takes time. Sometimes it takes a really long time. The Minnesota Child Victims Act gave me an opportunity to tell the story of what happened to me and my fellow students at the Children's Theater Company. It gave us the opportunity to reveal the level of negligence that existed in an institution that allowed perpetrators like Jason McLean to allow them to be successful. What the Child Victims Act didn't do was provide a way for me to hold Mr. McLean accountable for his actions. Because of the fact that the statute exists, McLean was allowed to sell off his assets and flee to Mexico. He is a serial perpetrator, and he should not be running a business in Mexico. He should be in jail. The system as it exists is slanted in the favor of the people who perpetrate sexual crimes. There are many things that need to happen and be established in order to shift the power dynamic away from sexual predators. Teaching children, women, and marginalized members of our society that they have agency over their bodies, and educating professionals so they can be trauma-informed is crucial in affecting change, but it isn't enough. As our understanding of how victims are affected evolves, we need to evolve the laws as well to give the victims of these crimes the gift of time. And I want to thank you all for your time today in considering this very important bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today, Ms. Stearns.
Thank you.
Representative Gomez.
Devonna Pittman is the next testifier.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for hearing us on today. My very first...
I'm sorry, ma'am,
Can you hear me?
you'll need to state your name for the record.
Devonna Pittman.
Very well. Thank you so much.
My very first sexual violation happened when I was 5 years old in preschool. It was a very confusing moment for me, and I didn't know how to articulate it. I'm a survivor of sexual violence. At the age of 32, I disclosed to my family and loved ones what had happened. It was something that I had never said out loud to anyone. I had been a victim of sexual violence. I don't know that reporting it was ever an option. I'd known other young women and girls who had been violated. They reported it and didn't get justice. Then there were those who never reported it because they thought no one would believe them or believe that they didn't want it. So who would believe me? Was it worth it to dissect the trauma, to recount horrific details in front of people I didn't know or people who might not believe me? Was it worth it to sit in court day after day and not get justice? Was it worth it to deal with the aftermath of being a sexual violence victim? For me, reporting it was never an option. Not 24 hours after the incident, reporting it wasn't even an option a decade after the incident. Men and women who suffer sexual trauma are often psychologically paralyzed. As a survivor, I pretended it never happened. Victims of sexual violence often hide behind the curtain of shame, but they are among us everywhere we turn. I am one of many. Many survivors arrive at the point of feeling like they can cope, but we are never, ever whole again. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I laughed when I wanted to grieve. The seemingly impenetrable barrier of shame can only be explained by someone who has experienced the very essence being ripped from their soul. It can only be explained by those who have, by some default mechanism, figured out just how to get through another day. Individuals who strip peace and solitude from innocent victims should not be granted the right to peace and solitude. Eliminating the statute of limitations for perpetrators will hold repeat offenders accountable, and it will remind sexual predators that there are consequences for their deviance. We need as much time to heal, to be ready to disclose horrific details, and to literally one day face our perpetrators. The strength that is needed to break through the horror of being violated cannot be bound by a statute of limitation. Victims of sexual violence need the assurance of knowing that whenever they come forward, that there will be justice for them. And most importantly, there will be consequences for their perpetrator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman, for your testimony. Representative Gomez.
The next testifier is Linda Thompson.
Welcome to the committee, Ms. Thompson.
Hello, my name is Linda Thompson, and my Indian name is Eagle Coming Woman. I am Bear Clan. I am from the Boys Fort Band of Ojibwe and a descendant of both Leech Lake and Mille Lacs Lake. I am the mother to 6 children and some grandkids now, former foster parent and an adoptive parent. I'm truly honored to have the opportunity to speak to you today about eliminating the time limit for reporting felony sexual violence in Minnesota. I'm sorry, I'm really nervous. I am currently the membership and outreach coordinator for the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault Coalition. We are a statewide tribal coalition and a national tribal technical assistance provider. Our coalition membership spans the entire state and includes 108 individuals and 38 organizational representatives. Also, tribal communities, and we do include urban representation in this number as well. We provide training, education, and technical assistance to programs, and in addition, we provide technical assistance to tribes and community organizations across the country who are addressing sexual violence and sex trafficking. I have been a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate for over 25 years, both in an urban setting and on a tribal reservation. We know the statistics are 1 out of 3 Native girls and 1 out of 5 Native boys will be abused in their lifetime. But actually, the crime of sexual violence knows no boundaries, from elders to infants, from urban, tribal, and rural settings, and all genders have unfortunately experienced the crime of sexual violence. I have heard members of my own family, including 2 of my children, and many of our people tell about the sexual violence they experienced. Yes, sometimes it was days, weeks, months, and even years or decades passed before they told anybody what happened or who had hurt them. Some said they didn't remember what had happened until early adulthood, while in recovery from addiction, in counseling, church, while in the middle of crisis, or while experiencing anxiety. Something triggered their memories, whether it was a smell, a song, a place, a visual image. It opened a place of remembering that trauma, a time when someone had hurt them sexually. I have presented at many conferences, providing information, education, and training on the crime of sexual violence. Almost always, when I am done talking, I have someone come and talk to me and want to tell me what had happened to them or to somebody that they loved. When there is a distance between sexual violence and the reporting, I believe there are numerous reasons why the people do not report, at least this is what I've been told from my family. Sometimes it is the safety, fear, or threats that can contribute to the unknowing or forgetting because of now the person or child is in survival mode. The mind and the body has a way to protect us. The effects contribute to what is acknowledged now as complex trauma. It may not come out immediately following the incident, but through education, school, whether we're in school and businesses, community, through the movies or the use of media, we have increased the reporting. But there also remains people who do not have a safe space or place or person to tell what has happened to them. We have developed newer forms of investigative techniques, and the use of technology empowers investigations to crimes that have happened years and years ago. Many times when one person comes forward and tells what happened, it opens up a floodgate, and other people feel safe enough to tell. I have witnessed this happen in communities. One person tells, and then others follow and disclose what happened from the same alleged perpetrator. For many victims, survivors, having the validation from the criminal justice system is the first step in their healing journey. At the end of it all we really want and deserve is a safe community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Thompson. Representative Gomez, you have another testifier?
That's the end of my testifiers, Mr. Chair.
Very well. Well, let me just take then a quick second here to acknowledge our testifiers, in particular Ms. Stearns, Ms. Pittman, and Ms. Thompson, for the courage of your testimony, for the courage of your journey to find who you are and not have that have been defined by others, and for the strength of your voice to fully expect that your legislature walk with you and walk with others who are survivors and victims. We certainly pray for the wisdom to be able to construct better laws that provide protection, that provide true justice. So thank you for your presence here today. It's vitally, vitally important. Perhaps this might be a good time for questions from the committee of Representative Gomez and/or any of our testifiers, and then I'll open it up for the general public. Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to thank Representative Gomez for bringing this bill. Really appreciate you taking the lead on this, and also to the survivors who had the strength to share your stories with us today. We really appreciate your courage and all of the advocacy you're doing. So you're trying to make things better for other people, and we really very much appreciate that. I just also really wanted to highlight what you said, Ms. Stearns, about perpetrators silencing victims, and really the way the statute of limitations is written now, it's another way that silences victims. months. So I think that this is time to make this change. I did just have one question, I think just for clarity, so people are clear, that the effective date for this doesn't look back in time, that we can't constitutionally change that to look back in time. And I just wanted to get your verification of that, if you would, Representative Gomez.
You got it. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Representative Moller. So this is for crimes that happen moving forward from the state or from the enactment.
And I do want to acknowledge we have an Assistant County Attorney from Ramsey County, can also help questions. I think our County Attorney, John Choi, needed to leave. Representative Moller, you're
I'm good.
All right.
Thank you.
Good. Other members? Representative Grassel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, the County Attorneys Association, where do they stand on this?
Representative Gomez.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Representative Grassel, John Choi, or County Attorney Choi was here in a capacity representing both his office and the County Attorneys Association, and they support this legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Mariani, Representative, I want to thank you for bringing this forward. It's something I think we do need to look at. The toughest part is I know Representative Grassel probably as well actually had to work one of these cases. They're very difficult. I've worked many cases, not just in the sexual assault field. I've worked homicides. A homicide is easier to convict than a sexual assault. To get a good conviction, the sooner the report, the better, because we need the evidence. Because our Constitution is set up as innocent until proven guilty. And it's got to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the longer the time goes, the harder it is to get that conviction. And we've seen in the news over the last few years what appears to be a lot of false accusations from years ago. I want to make sure that we can protect the innocent as well as convict the guilty. So it's a tight rope you're walking here, and I appreciate you trying to do this because it is important, but we also want to make sure we do it right to protect all the innocent people.
Representative Gomez.
Mr. Chair and Representative, thank you for the question. I just want to clarify that nothing in this piece of legislation changes the threshold of evidence that you have to present in order to convict someone. Also, what we actually know, what's in the data, is that false accusations are incredibly rare. And you spoke to the difficulty, right, of actually making one of these cases. And so in the few cases where there might be a false accusation, they still have to meet that threshold. And so I guess, with respect, I don't think that objection is really very substantial in this case because, like I said, all of the evidentiary requirements are there.
Very well. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to that point real quickly, because this language is also contained in a bill that I will have up next, and so I'm going to kind of make points on both sides. So I actually have the fiscal note in front of me, and for all the different parts of the bill I have, but it also includes the elimination of the statute of limitations. And if you look out into the out years, it's projected through the fiscal note that if you look out as far as 2032, it might result in 7 more convictions. So the bar, as you know, Representative Johnson, is incredibly high. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is fantastic. And I think what's the best part about this, though, is that there is now an understanding in the community of those that have been assaulted that it takes as long as it takes, right? Your journey takes as long as it takes. Law enforcement will be there for you when you're ready. And I think that's the message that we want to send. So if we accomplish nothing, which we will, because this will accomplish at least 7 more cases a year. But even if it had 2, it's still 2 more convictions more than we had before, because we know our conviction rate is very low. But it sends a message to all victims that we are there for you and that this is as important as a murder case. Even though the victim is alive, they are alive and they are wounded and they are hurting. And so I appreciate you bringing this forward. And I had this in my bill before, and I need to circle back and get myself on your bill. We're a bit busy, so I need to circle back and do that. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very well. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd been thinking about this too, that I guess I agree with the point that these are very difficult cases to prove to begin with, and thinking about proving a case decades later, it's very, very difficult. And so just when I've thought about the practicalities of this along the way, I've had some challenges and been supportive, but then especially in hearing the testimony today, I'm feeling even better about that, just because the thought of, regardless of what it does for an individual case, and it may well be helpful for an individual case, it's just so powerful. I want to thank the testifiers for just pointing out the message that it sends to those who've experienced sexual violence, and then certainly to perpetrators. I can't say that line again, but just about somebody who has the certainty and the peace, who's committed sexual violence, of saying, oh, now I know that I couldn't possibly prosecute it for that. I'm such a powerful message. So thank you so much to Representative Gomez and to the testifiers. And Mr. Chair, I do need to acknowledge the Assistant County Attorney in question is Karen Long from Ramsey County, and she's actually the one of the 2018 Attorneys of the Year named by Minnesota Lawyer Magazine, which she would probably not want to point out, but I'm going to point out on her behalf. She's and a colleague of mine in the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, and really just one of the top attorneys in the state. I'm working on this, and prosecutors, and proud to have her as a colleague and be working on this. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Gomez.
Representative Pinto, at the risk of being a little jingoistic, as a Ramsey County citizen and resident, I am not surprised. Karen Long's quality of service and being acknowledged as such. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to testify on House File 734? Please come forward. And members, we have about another half hour or so. I want to make sure we get to Representative O'Neill's bill, because that one we were teeing up weeks ago, and the polar vortex decided to intervene. And we do have a very important testifier that we want to make sure we honor her presence here on her testimony. But please, ma'am, give us your name and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Keila Marie Granda. Thank you so much, Chair and Committee, for hearing me. I've had the opportunity to be here before, and this is my second time, and I just want to say thank you for the incredible work that you're doing. I will keep it short. So again, my name is Keila Marie Granda. I'm the Executive Director of Unspoken Voices, a nonprofit that works in violence prevention and response. I've been in this field and served as an advocate for over a decade. Several years ago, I was actually brutally raped myself by a colleague. We were working together on violence prevention education for high schools. And I was drugged and repeatedly raped over the span of several hours. I reported the rape. I did what you were supposed to do. I even wore a wire going back into the individual's home and was able to capture him stating that he knew that I was not able to consent, that he knew that I had no idea what was going on. The case moved forward for several months, and then it was dropped a week before trial. I was scared, I was terrified for the trial, but at least I knew I'd have a chance to have my voice heard. Week before the trial, charges were dismissed. They were dismissed because it was revealed that I had previously been sexually assaulted, and that my urine, the police had lost the chain of custody on my urine, and it was destroyed. So even with a taped admission of guilt, even with knowing that this individual was in a position of power and there were reports that he had done similar things in the past, even with all of that, the case was dropped. He was free to live his life. He is a high school principal. He is in a position of authority. He coaches girls basketball and volleyball. It was a tragedy. It was not just to me, but to every victim everywhere, that this man would now have the opportunity to continue harming, to continue using his authority to be able to do something, to be able to do what he did to me, to do to others. My statute of limitations runs out in December 2019. That power that was taken from me, first by this individual, and second by the system, will never be regained. I have worked in this field and continue to work in this field as a survivor speaking for other survivors, because I hope that through this we can regain our voice. Unfortunately, for me, I'm at an end. In 2019, I'm at an end. But I don't want that to be the case for other survivors, and I just urge, I implore you, please, to consider this bill, because the amount, what you're doing is you're giving power back to individuals who've lost their ability, their will. You're giving that power back. And I ask you to please consider doing so, because what we have, what we need, rests in your hands. And I just again urge you to support this. Thank you so much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your voice and your testimony here today, Ms. Granda, and for your courage to consistently expect publicly that your legislative body respond to you and to other survivors as well. Thank you. Representative Gomez, I think we're at the final words for you for now, that is, until we lay the bill over. And so I turn to you for your final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And I just want to once again just express my profound gratitude to all of you for being here today. To Ms. Stearns and Ms. Pittman and Ms. Thompson and Ms. Grande and Ms. Mohammed and Ms. Super, for being vulnerable with us and allowing us to hopefully understand a little bit more than we did half an hour ago. So thank you. And I would ask for the committee's support for House File 734.
Yes, of course. Vitally important bill. Thank you, Representative Gomez. With that, the chair lays House File 734 over for possible inclusion in our omnibus bill. And members, I'm going to turn to Representative O'Neill, House File 480. And Representative O'Neill, your motion, I believe, is to lay over House File 40 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. And I believe you have an amendment as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As my testifiers come up. So, Mr. Chair, that is my motion. I do have an amendment, and what I'd like to do, just in the deference of time, and my testifier came all the way from Wisconsin, and unfortunately she couldn't come last time because we did have that polar vortex. It was just awful. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently than I normally would do. Normally I would like to walk through and do the amendments, but if we could, Mr. Chair, if we could turn to the testifier, and I'd like for the committee to hear her story. And out of her story really birthed this bill, which is why it's called the Hannah Bill. And not all the parts in here relate directly to her case, but when you're going to either go big or go home sometimes. So I included a lot of different parts of things, talking to different researchers, different professionals, and I don't know if County Attorney Choi is still here. Maybe he's already left, but he actually had a lot to do with this bill, sat together with him. And of course, before I return it to Hannah, I do know that the Star Tribune researcher and reporter is in the audience, and I just wanted to personally thank him, too, Brandon Stahl, because his many-part series, I've actually lost track. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's 8 or 9 or 10 at this point. It's a lot of denied justice. And, he featured Hannah and her dad on the front and went through her story. And thankfully, he kept in contact with me throughout the entire series and gave me more than is actually in the report. So more than that was in the paper, which helped me craft this legislation too. So I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, and then I'll return and walk through the bill and go through some of the statistics from the story. But I just want to acknowledge those people that are in the room right now, in case they do have to leave, in case this goes on longer than the time allotted.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill. House File 480 is formally before us as a result of your motion. I did have the pleasure to meet Hannah earlier today in the elevator. Hello again. As well as her father. So welcome, owner's dad. Okay. Welcome to the Minnesota House and to this committee. We look forward to your testimony, Hannah.
Thank you. I'm Hannah Eve Trosseth, and I'm 17. And I was supposed to actually come here, like I said, or like Marion said, a few weeks ago and talk. And even then, I didn't have a speech written out, which I really should have, because I've never talked in front of so many important people before, and I'm really nervous. But I think this really does have to come from the heart, because it's really important to me and to you, Marion. So I'm just really excited to help you and be able to be here and talk about what I think needs to be done, I guess. So the first time that I was sexually assaulted, I was actually 9, and it was my stepdad. And my mom was very sick at this point, going through chemo, and she had cervical cancer. And I didn't really understand what happened. If I said something earlier, maybe something would have came out of that case. But I did wait about a year because I was really young and I didn't understand. And my mom was so sick at that point. So once she did pass away, I did talk to one of my 5th grade teachers about something that happened about a year ago and got into counseling. And after that, I moved in with my dad full time, and he was really supportive of everything about my mom dying and at that point about the sexual assault that had occurred. And so about 3 or 4 years later, it's my mom's birthday, which also happens to be New Year's. And I'm a new teen now, I'm 13. And I'm just really excited, I guess, to hang out with my friends and do my thing. It's New Year's. I feel like it's a very big day for hanging out and just doing your own thing with all your homies, I guess. And I was just super excited as a really young kid to do that. And all my girlfriends, they came over and they hung out for a while knowing that it was my mom's birthday. And I don't know, they all wanted to go drink and go to a party, and I wasn't really up for that, but I was also wasn't invited, so I didn't go. And then I was in contact with someone on Facebook that I'd never actually hung out with before, which was, of course, a mistake, but did not excuse any actions that occurred. And he came and picked me up, and we went back to his house. And on the way back to his house, a friend of his called and said that he was having a fight, and I don't know if it was physical, but it sounded very serious, actually, with his baby mama, he said. And there was a lot of screaming over the phone, and he looked at me and asked me if it was okay if his friend came to his house, and I said, of course, it's your house. It's your holiday, of course. If your friend wants to come over, it's fine with me. And the plan was for me to just go back the next day. We're just gonna hang out, watch some movies. I don't know. And so when his friend got in the car, that's when things changed a little bit. And the vibe was thrown off. And I knew that something was very wrong because his friend kept continuing to make comments about who's in the front seat. Oh, she looks small, but she really is cute. And commenting on my body when we got out of the car and talking about the things that he would like to do to me downstairs and when we got into this guy's house. And I mentioned leaving and getting my dad to come pick me up, and they said, nobody's leaving this address, and you're not leaving. And so throughout the night, they took turns, and they told me that they knew where I lived, and they knew I didn't live there alone, and that my name should not slip out of their mouths, and continue to do things like show me their wallets that were full of money and tell me that they could make them money, I could make money from them, and I guess give me some kind of power role, I guess, over all these years is what I've been thinking, because that's why I didn't say anything the second I got home. And I'm really lucky enough that they did drive me home the next day. Very grateful. And I remember getting home and not knowing who to tell or if to tell anybody. And I sat on the chair in my living room for about 7 hours one day, I think about 2 days after it happened. And I wasn't crying, I wasn't obviously emotionally upset, but my dad's my dad. Of course, he knew something was wrong. And so he asked me, why don't you shower, kid? You look rough. And I told him I don't know if I want to. because at that point I didn't know if it was safe or not to say what had happened. And when he figured out what had happened, he just kind of, knew right away. He called the Richmond Police Department, and I didn't want anything to do with him because I was just really scared for my family. And after about, I'd like to say like 4 or 5 interviews with Alicia Metry, and a few different people from the police department in Richmond where I live, and a couple different counties in Minnesota, they said that there'd probably be a trial. And I really thought there was going to be, and I was scared. But with my dad's support and everybody else that was there, I was really ready to go and tell my story and try and get justice. Because the first time I didn't, I was so young, I was confused. And so this time I was really ready, And then they told me that it wasn't going to get prosecuted because there's a lot of different parts in the story where age was confused and the time was confused and locations and how and where and when. So I didn't get to go to trial, and I didn't ever get to talk to John Choi personally. Today was my first time meeting him. He had some very wise words up here to say. So, and then throughout the last couple of years, Marion and Brandon, in the last year especially, actually, have been helping me a lot with moving past this and moving forward. So I'd like to thank you guys.
Thank you, Hannah, for being here today. What a courageous thing for you to do, to be here, to work with Representative O'Neill and the county attorney, and frankly believing that that justice should be yours, and that our government, our laws should protect you. It's our job to make sure that if that's not happening, and it sounds like it's not, or it hasn't, we correct that. But we can't correct it if we don't know. And so it takes someone coming forward to tell us what we don't know. So tremendous courage on your part. I'm sure lots of others have told you this, that nothing that happened to you comes as a result of anything you did. We believe that. We think it's important that you believe that as well.
Thank you, sir.
Very well.
Thank you,
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out a few different pieces, and this is the first time Hannah's had an opportunity to share her story in this format, and she didn't get her day in court, which is incredibly frustrating. The county attorney's office reviewed the case 4 times, 2 at my behest. I know 2 at her father's behest, who actually is a classmate of mine from high school. So that's how we got reconnected. It's funny how those circles never quite close. They live in Wisconsin, so that's another interesting aspect to this. So she was brought from Wisconsin here to Minnesota, to Maplewood. And yes, there was a confusion over age. She was 13 at the time. The 2 perpetrators were 21, almost 22. She had said at some point, I think that she was 15 or 16, they had said that they were 19. So there was a confusion about age, which is why in the changes that I have, I went into the statutory rape portions, because there's a problem. There's a problem there. Just really quickly to the part of the bill, mistake of age is a defense between the ages of, between the ages of 13 and 16 is statutory rape. And right now the statute says that if you're 2 years older and it's 3rd degree, so penetration, then the actor is less than 10 years older, then you can use mistake of age as a defense. And that was a consideration in this case, unfortunately. That was one of the barriers. So I struck that language. So I know that is something that we can have a conversation about. But the other part is we talked a lot about the statute of limitations. And, we're coming up on, we just passed 3 years, I believe, from when you filed. So there's a confusion out there in the world of victims of, well, how long do I have? How much time do I have to pursue this? If there's DNA, it's different, and if there's other cases, it's different. So I said, well, maybe functionally it doesn't change how the court proceeds, how prosecution proceeds, but for victims it makes a difference. If we get rid of the statute of limitations, it changes for victims. It changes their mindset. It changes, as you heard, there's a whole group of women behind me earlier, not behind me, but behind here earlier saying it really, really matters to them. So we looked at the statute of limitations as a possible consideration in moving Hannah's law forward. So I did name this after Hannah. Also, she didn't tell you this part, but when she arrived at these two men at their home, at his home, they had given her marijuana and they gave her something to drink, which she felt very woozy and really out of it very, very quickly. So it's very possible that they also roofied her on top of everything else or gave her something else that was really strong to make her incapacitated. Now, you can see she is a tiny person. If we stood up, I'm not a tall person, but she's really not tall. So she's not a large person. They still felt the need to drug her to accomplish what they wanted. And they were pretty clear as to what they wanted from the beginning. And so I went into mentally incapacitated statute. And in mentally incapacitated, it has a line that talks about that you're administered to you, someone else administers it to you. And that began a discussion at MINCASA, and we had a long conversation about that. But that's where that came from, about striking that this substance, whatever it is administered to you by someone else. And that became a very, very big barrier for justice, and not just for Hannah, but for thousands of Hannahs out there. I had a conversation with my daughter, who's 22. Her name is Olivia. And I actually had a third daughter, or third child, I should say, whose name was Hannah. And when you told me your name was Hannah, I almost fell on the floor. But anyway, so my daughter, Olivia, and I were out to dinner talking to her friend, Abigail, who is a cheerleader at the University of Minnesota. And they were telling me the story of how they have to circle the wagons around their girls. This is their language. We circle the wagons around our girls to make sure they all get home at night and nobody gets raped. And they do this every single time they go out. Every single time. Can you imagine every single time you go out in public, you have to have a buddy system or a multi-buddy system just to get home without being raped? That's the culture that these girls live in every single day. Every single day. And this little girl, who is about the size of you, only half as wide, she's just skinny as can be. Tiny little Abigail was telling me, and again, I've known her since she was 4. She said, she calls me Mom because I've known her since she was 4. And she said, Mom, I've even been roofied. And I said, what are you talking about? What happened? She goes, I was at a frat house at a party and a guy handed me a drink. And there was something in it. And she said, I instantly knew that he had drugged me. He had me pinned up against the wall. He was trying to force me to stay. And I had a friend of mine who got me home and got me home safely because I would have been raped that night. This happens all the time. She said, I don't know anybody who hasn't been raped or hasn't been roofied or doesn't know someone that's been roofied. This is at the University of Minnesota campus, and I'm sure it's pervasive across others as well. If you just look at the Star Tribune article, which I'm so glad that Brandon is here and is a part of this day, because really the report that the Star Tribune did was just incredible. I wrote numbers all over it because I love to tell stories and numbers, but when they looked at 1,300 cases filed between 2015 and 2016 of the rape cases, only 25% of those were even sent to a prosecutor. Only 25% of 1,300. Once the prosecutor got them, 50% of them were just rejected. After all of that, so from the 1,300 cases in those 2 years that they sampled, only 7% resulted in a conviction. 7%. Now, unfortunately, that's ahead of the national average. So there was another statistic in the Denied Justice series that had 2016, and it said 481 convictions, felony convictions in 2016, so 481. So if I do the math backwards and say that's an average of 7%, That's 6,390 cases that got no resolution, no justice. So just in 1 year alone, in 2016, there are 6,390 cases just like Hannah. 6,390 cases in 1 year, just like Hannah. We can do better. We absolutely have to do better. The bill that I put together has two components that were already heard. You just heard one about the statute of limitations, so I won't go into that. And we had heard earlier the position of authority, where it was extending it 120 days. Now, I put those in there before I even knew anyone else was drafting anything, but they're in there. And I talked about the mentally incapacitated portion. And I did talk a little bit about statutory rape, and so I do have an amendment, and I would like to speak to that now if I could.
Please, Representative O'Neill.
So members, in the amendment, and Representative Moller, thank you, because, you know, I remember on day 2, I think, of us being sworn in, you approached me. We were in the basement, and you introduced yourself, and you were really excited to work together. And we have literally worked together since day 2. I won't say day 1, but day 2. So we worked on this language just a little bit, and this is a result of her reading through it and me reading through it. And these are just some very small changes. And in the first change, it's saying, in the mentally incapacitated part, it's just adding the word is and in a couple places, and it just so that it reads more clearly. And what it says is that you are under the influence of these substances, and I won't go through them all, and you lack the judgment to give consent. So you are incapacitated because of some substance, whatever it happened to be, and you lack the judgment to give consent. And I gotta tell you, I didn't realize the impact that change would be, but the fiscal note bears it out. So I think does everyone have the fiscal note? Was it passed out? Great, okay. So when I look at the mentally incapacitated, and you can find that on your fiscal note, page 15, if you want to follow along. And here it says mentally impairment, but it's mentally incapacitated in statute. It's the first column, middle of the page. And as this ticks up throughout the years, it's a change of 78 more people being convicted. If you look at the bottom total, under mentally impaired, 78 more people that committed rape, and possibly serial rape, because, you know, there was another report I read about nationally, the vast majority of the hits in CODIS is actually, they're serial, so there are serial rapists. But in any case, so 78 more folks, serial rapists or rapists, will be in prison, and 78 more Hannahs will get justice, just from that one change alone. So I wanted to point that out. So then back to the amendment. When I'm also striking the mistake of age as a defense. And in so doing, Representative Moller and I were looking at that and saying, well, right now for third degree, which would be penetration, the actor has to be over 24 months older, and everything else says 48 months, and we just felt that was really too small of a window. And so I'm changing it to be consistent with fourth degree, which would be 48 months older. So the victim and the bad actor would be 48 months older. And so that's the changes in the amendment. And I would like to move that amendment now, if I could.
Very well. Representative O'Neill moves the A1 amendment. Any further discussion? Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, you talked about 78. That's an accumulative number. It's not 78 every year, just so folks know that this is an accumulation of the number of beds that would be needed for those individuals. So I was shocked when I saw that number, actually. I think this really raises the profile of how prevalent this is, even if it is an accumulative number. But at the same time, it's very disconcerting and probably something that's long overdue.
Further discussion? Chairman Lush.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and perhaps it's just the fiscal note that bears this out, but I'm wondering, I know in a lot of cases, maybe someone was denied justice on this criminal sexual conduct, but they got them on another felony that may not be the equivalent timeline, but they got them on something. Does that 78, does that represent exclusively those people that are walking around free with no consequences? Or in there, are there also folks that law enforcement and prosecution doubled their efforts to make sure they were held accountable for something we found on them? I don't know if you know what I'm asking, but that's a staggering number to me as well, Representative Dean. That's why I asked. We get these guys on anything else? Did we get these guys on anything else?
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the answer to that because I didn't create the fiscal note, but I read it through very carefully, and I don't recall reading, that specific thing, like, did we get them on something else? I don't know, and maybe somebody from law enforcement or DOC or prosecutors, if they're still, probably the county prosecutors, county attorneys, might know that. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well, that's fair, Mr. Chair. I don't need necessarily to ask that right now, but yeah, I'll get the answer offline. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We may have someone in the audience, if they're willing to come forward, that can help with that. In the meantime, members, we are seeing a glare. We are past our adjournment time. It is my intent for us to recess and then come back. But perhaps, and I think probably a few more questions. So I was hoping just to, move your bill into the, position of laying it over, but I think it deserves a little bit more conversation. I think you probably agree as well.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I kind of imagined that was going to happen. Do you think we can move the amendment now and then have that tidied up?
Why don't we do that, if that's okay? So all in favor of the A1 amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Same sign, motion prevails. So House File 480 is amended. Representative O'Neill, Hannah's dad had waved. I think he wanted to say something, and as long as, I don't think there's any need for Hannah and her dad to hang around until midnight tonight, and so perhaps we could take advantage of them being here now to hear from her dad.
I am Bradley Trossett, Hannah's father, and I just wanted to say that Hannah really gave you a quick synopsis of what really happened to her on that ordeal, and maybe there should be something in there about DNA, because there's so much evidence compiled against these people, and there's DNA. So, that should have been looked on. I can't wrap that around my head, how we could look past DNA evidence. So, and that's all I wanted to say. And besides, I really appreciate every single one of you being here today. You other ladies that are here today, you're courageous. And my daughter is courageous, beautiful woman. And thank you for your time, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Representative Edison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Hannah. My name's Heather Edelson. I represent Edina, and I just want to say you may not have got your day in court, but you have your day here, and I want you to acknowledge right now that you're using your voice for so much good, and I hope you continue to do that. You are so brave. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you so much.
Representative Moller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also wanted to thank you, Hannah, for being here, and for your dad, too. We really appreciate it. And a thank you to Representative O'Neill for working on this. And I have appreciated how we've been able to work together on many of these issues. And just want to kind of piggyback off of something you said about statistics. Nationally, it's the RAIN Network report said of 1,000 rapes, only 5 result in felony convictions. And the vast majority of those are never even reported to the police. And I think in large part when there's drugs or alcohol involved, a lot of times victims blame themselves and won't even come forward to report those crimes anyway. So I really appreciate the work you've done on this. I think Wisconsin's maybe done some work around intoxication too. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember what state, but some states, and maybe Mincasa can verify that or not. I don't know. But anyway, just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moller. Representative Johnson.
Well, Chair Mariani, Hannah, thank you. What you went through was not deserved. We want to do everything we can to put the perpetrators behind bars where they belong, but hopefully a bill like this will help us be able to do that.
Thank you.
A lot of love coming from this way to you, Hannah, and thank you for your love back to us, because when you expect people to do the right thing, that's a form of love as well. So
Thank you so much for giving me time to talk.
Yes, and have a safe drive back across the border to Wisconsin. Members, we're going to stand in recess. We'll stand in recess to call the chair. Our expectation is that it won't be any sooner than 6:30 because I believe the GOP caucus meets until then. And so be watching and looking for notices from us. Oh, yes, and we still have our corrections. For those of you who are on corrections, we still have that as well to finish off from this morning. So we're going to meet back in this room. Is that right? Very well. So look for 6:30, but also look for notices from the chair. All right. Oh, okay, hold on. So corrections will convene here at 6:45. Then a full Committee of Public Safety will convene 10, 15 minutes after that. But do look for notices from us and members. Until then, we stand in recess.